In this presentation, I'm going to go through some of just the very basics of judging the Western Horsemanship class. Alright, horsemanship really, remember, is based on really how the horse performs for the rider, and it's really looked upon as a combination of the horse's performance and the rider's skill. To me, it really shows how effective a rider is, and if the horse doesn't do some things or maybe is not as collected or framed, it's a reflection of the communication between the horse and rider. So throughout the class, we are evaluating the rider's position, how accurate and correct he is upon the pattern, and depending on the association that you might be judging for, you may also be required to put the riders on the rail. So it's an important thing to remember that depending on where you're judging, some associations require you to do rail work, others do not, and it's important to understand that as you're getting ready to judge the class. So, as in with everything else that we judge, we do look at the hierarchy of judging, and we first look at how correct they are, then look at the quality of the performance, and then look at the degree of difficulty. First off, the most important is the correctness, and throughout that we're going to look not only at the rider's position, but also do they go through the pattern in a correct manner, and then are they correct about the way that they perform on the rail. Quality is going to come into play with how those different things. As far as in our horsemanship class, we're looking at their position, we're looking at the smoothness, we're looking at the accuracy of the pattern, the quiet communication between the horse and rider, and those types of things. Degree of difficulty can be assessed and increase a rider's score. For example, within a pattern, if they do it with a little bit faster pace but under control, if they make some things tighter, and different things like that can increase a rider's degree of difficulty throughout a horsemanship class. So when we talk about their basic position for the horsemanship rider, kind of the thing that's always used is we do look for this parallel line, or this up and down line I should say, through the rider's shoulder, hip, and heel. And that really should remain the same throughout the rider's performance. The most effective ones are really, you're not going to see much change in that, but they're going to be soft and relaxed and not go through there very stiff, but they have very good communication and connection with their horse. The hands, we're going to look at the location of both, and the rein hand should be kind of up in this area here, and we really should not, for the most highest quality with the greatest degree of difficulty, should not see a lot of motion and movement with that rider's hand. Now, there's not a rule for the free hand, but I will tell you that it is going to be a better presentation for most riders to have the free hand up and in a relaxed position. You will see occasionally a person riding with their free hand down, and by rule for most association that's okay, but as you're judging for the quality and the degree of difficulty, most are going to do a better presentation if both hands are up kind of in this manner as this young lady has here. Also, we need to look at their use of their legs, and they need to be effective legs, and I'll show you a few pictures of these that are on the horse, telling the horse what to do. I always say that the rider's hands, the legs are telling them what the horse to do, the rider's hands are just backing him up. So the rider should be very strong with their legs, they should stay wrapped around their horse, soft against that horse's side, and be able to change the push and the feel for those legs depending on what the rider's asking that horse to do. So here's just some still pictures of some different things, and I'll talk a little bit about rider position and different kinds of things. This is a rider, I'll be honest, most likely it's a person that is in a pleasure class, but just to pick on their horsemanship a little bit, we don't have a really good line up here through their shoulder, their hip. You can see their leg is shoved out quite a bit ahead of them, so that would be not a very good quality or degree of difficulty for this person in the horsemanship class. Also, this horse is riding with a bosel, so they have two hands on the reins, and I'll be honest with you, as the competition increases, it's very difficult to do a really sharp performance with a bosel or a snaffle bit, and really you need to stress, if you're working with someone, that they do get up and ride with one hand on the reins. This rider here, this is, you can see kind of with some of their upper body position where they're trying to keep the elbows in tight. The hand is kind of, this horse and rider's having a little bit of a disagreement. So they're trying to work and get the best performance as they can out of that horse. Again, this is a rider kind of probably in an extended lope situation, and again, good communication here, good leg on that horse. She's got, even though she's probably in an extended lope, has a very good line between her hands, excuse me, down here through her head, through her heel, and kind of a rider shown with a lot of control, a lot of connection, with a good quality, and probably a pretty good degree of difficulty as she's going through performing on that horse. A stickler for hands, and here's some different pictures that you can see some differences of hands. Again, this young lady most likely is really in a pleasure class, but this horse, as you can see, we're going to evaluate her as a horsemanship rider, and not only is her elbow out here and she needs to turn her hand over, this free hand is down, and you can just see a little bit of a difference of the presentation with the free hand being down versus up, and you really get a better, sharper picture if the hand is up. As a judge, I'm going to judge how their performance goes and see how they get through it. This rider is very good with her hands. You can see her elbows are very tight. There's no air, nothing you can see between her upper body and her upper arm. The hands are very even and very centered, so doing a very nice job. This is a little bit different presentation with rider riding with a romal, and so they will have their free hand holding the tail of the romal. Excuse me, so it's going to be a little bit different. My main criticism with this rider here is the rein hand is quite elevated, and we really would prefer that rein hand to be down. I'm guessing with this situation that the reins were probably a little bit longer than what they should have been as she's going through this pattern. Picking on her position a little bit too. Also, this rider's legs are shoved out ahead of her a little bit for the overall presentation. Excuse me. Now we also are going to look and pick on him a little bit on rein length. For Western horsemanship, we need to have connection with that horse to get him to go through and perform a pattern. And so this rein length to me would be very unacceptable for a Western pleasure class. It's quite excessively long. Also, the reins are uneven. The young lady here on this paint horse or pinto horse, a little bit tighter with its reins. The head is still perpendicular, and so for a horsemanship class, this is very acceptable as far as how she has her hands and how she has her reins. This rider here is getting ready to perform in a horsemanship class. He might be bumped back behind the bridle just a tad, but again, this is not offensive, and she's got good connection with her horse and looks like she's ready to take off, so this is a very appropriate rein length also. Some other things to pick on their individual's reins. Here's a young lady whose reins are long, and they're also a little bit uneven. And so to get the horse perform correctly, we would rather have her hand up a little bit and the reins maybe a tad tighter and more even. This rider also looks like she doesn't have a lot of good connection with her horse. He seems to become a little bit undone or uncollected, a little bit soft with the reins. What bothers me is that the horse doesn't really appear to be paying attention to her, and we'd like her to collect this horse up a little bit, have the horse's attention on her. These two riders are doing a very nice job. They're soft with their reins, but they have connection with those horses. You can see this rider is really pushing and driving this horse forward. Similarly with this one, we've got a good position and good length and communication between the horse and rider with their rein length. Effective use of legs to me is very, very important because they should stay wrapped around that horse, and the legs should be the main thing that are guiding and telling that horse where to go and what to do. These are two very different types of horses, but you can see this rider, she's got a good position. Her legs look like they stay wrapped around that horse, and the horse is gathered up and collected. This young man has a much longer torso, a little bit different style of horse, but again, good with his arms, and legs are staying right on and communicating to that horse what he's asking the horse to do. Similarly with this young lady, looking at her from behind, again, the legs are really on that horse and she's having good connection. I've used this picture quite a bit because to me it shows a rider that doesn't have a lot of good connection with their horse. The legs seem to be there, however, I really question how effective they are. He's kind of sitting back just a little bit, his hands elevated. You can see this horse is really hollowed out in his back. He doesn't have much flexion on the poll, which give it his jaw, and so they don't really seem to be communicating very well to go ahead and go through and negotiate a pattern. These are two pictures that I'd found that I think show a really good job of some differences between effective use of your hands and your legs. So in this first picture here, you can see the reins are somewhat long, the legs are not very tight on that horse, and so she's reining him around with her hand, and kind of the legs are just kind of there, and it's not a very sharp, kind of a sloppy way that she's asking this horse to turn around. In B here, you can see her legs are much more on her horse, the reins are shortened up, staying center, and I would bet that she's pushing with her legs to get that horse to turn, and her hands are just backing him up. And you can see this is a much sharper, much more correct kind of way that she's asking this horse to turn around. So to go through the scoring system and how this class is judged, I'm going to be kind of ahead of the curve on this, because for the Quarter Association, the Paint Association, they have just recently changed the scoring system, so this is going to be accurate for 2019. So you're getting really kind of ahead of the curve on this. This scoring system is very similar to what is used in reining and the cattle classes, and so it's going to go on a range of 0 to infinity with 70 V an average. The maneuver scores are going to go from -3 to +3 with half-point increments, so it will be +1, +1, +1.5, +2, +2.5, etc. A 0 score is where they're going to be correct with no degree of difficulty, so that's where they're going to just be as average. In addition, there is an overall score at the end, at the finish of the run, for the overall form and effectiveness, called an F and E, and that's going to be scored on a scale of 0 to +5, and none of it will not be on the negative, so a rider can get, for a really terrific form and highly effective rider, they can get as much as a +5. And again, this whole system is very similar, or just the same as what we do for many of the other pattern classes, such as reining, trail, western riding, or cattle classes, and those types of things. Penalties are really not much different. The previous system by these two associations had different kind of point deductions. However, minor penalties will be a 3-point deduction, majors a 5-point, and severe is a 10-point deduction. Alright, so also I'll preface all of this to remind you that some of the associations you may be judging for may require you to use this system. Some of them do not. Some of them, however, for me, it's a very good guide to use because it does standardize things. If you're judging and working with a judging team, it's an excellent way to teach them how to prioritize some of the different things that would be going on in a class. So the major penalties that are going to now be a -3 points, these really aren't any different than what was previously, but the point deduction is slightly lower. So break a gait at a walk or jog for up to 2 strides is a 3-point penalty. If they over or under turn from an 1/8 to a 1/4 revolution, it's a -3. A hit or a tick of the cone, and obviously check for the leads, looking down to check for the lead, are all going to be 3-point penalties. When we move to the major penalties, these are now going to be -5 points, and things such as they don't perform the specific gait or stop when called for within 10 feet of where it's supposed to be done, if they're on the wrong lead, or break a gait at the lope, except if they're correcting an incorrect lead. So they pop off in the wrong lead, they could basically do a simple change, and that break a gait is not going to be incorrect, but they will get docked for being in the wrong lead. Okay, break a gait at a walk or jog for more than 2 strides is another 5-point penalty. Losing a stirrup, head carried too low or behind the vertical, these are also 5-point penalties. 10-point penalties, more severe penalties, are losing a rein, using a hand to instill fear or praise in the pattern or the rail. And this would be really each time that they do it, so if they reach down and pet their horse, each time they do it, it's going to be a 10-point penalty. Holding on to the saddle, cueing with the end of the romal, disobediences such a buck, a kick, those types of things, which is pretty standard across many of our classes, and spurring in front of the cinch are also the other 5-point penalties. Disqualifications, these are riders that really should not be placed. Failure to display the correct number, and that's pretty standard. Abuse or schooling, falling, illegal use of equipment or illegal use of hands, such as they're riding with a curb bit and they reach down with 2 hands. These are pretty much standard across most of our classes. If they're off pattern, which includes things such as knocking over the cone or going on the wrong side of a cone, are also a disqualification. Never performing the correct lead or the gait, so it calls for a right lead and they never get that right lead, would be considered a disqualification if they over or underturn more than an eighth. Now, it should be noted that in AQHA and some of the other associations, if they are showing in the class of novice youth, novice amateur, or level 1 youth and amateur, or rookie classes, these types of things here in orange are not disqualifications. However, they should be placed below exhibitors that don't do these types of things. So that's something to be sure that you understand, depending on what association you might be judging for. I threw in just a couple sample patterns. There are various places you can go and get patterns done online. Again, you really need to, if you're looking at going to judge a horse show, make sure that your patterns are printed. Many places request that you submit them ahead of time, and also make sure that your patterns do follow whatever association rules that you have. But so this is just a very simple one, and remember that if it's very confusing and people don't understand it, then maybe you need to reevaluate how the pattern was written. Here's another pattern. I think you'll see a difference here of a hand-drawn one that many of us used to use, and you probably don't see this that often anymore. That's a little bit not quite as clear and a little bit more difficult to follow, and one that you'll get a lot of questions. I always say if I get a lot of questions, then generally I need to reevaluate the pattern, how it's drawn or how it's written, and make it a little bit more clear. So this basically is Okay, so basically as we look at some of the hierarchy of judging with our horsemanship, remember first they have to be correct. So did they do the pattern correct? Did they go through the maneuvers as they were prescribed? Did they do the rail work correct, and those types of things? Then the next thing we evaluate them on is quality, and so in our horsemanship we're looking at their position, how accurate they were as they negotiate through the pattern, how smooth they are and how they communicate to the horse. Do they work kind of as a team together? You know, a variety of these different kinds of things to work on looking at the quality. Then to up their score even to a higher level to get into those pluses, we're going to start looking at the degree of difficulty, and both in the pattern, seeing if they, if they have kind of have a forward pace. Maybe some patterns they can do some turnarounds a little bit quicker, tighten their circles up, increase their speed in some fast areas and things like that. So what have they done to increase their degree of difficulty, which can elevate their scores to a plus side, both in the pattern and on the rail. So this is really just some basic information about judging the horsemanship class. Remember, you really need to go see a variety of them to do the very best job.